Welcome to the Dog Trainers Podcast, a podcast created by dog trainers, for dog trainers, or anyone who's ever fallen in love with man's best friend.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back. This is episode 20 of the Dog Trainers Podcast. My name is Mariano. That's Brent. And we've got our very special guest here, Mr. Michael Ellis. How are you, sir?
I'm great. Thank you guys for having me on.
Thank you so much for being on. Now, this here is episode 20 of the podcast, and we just want to thank you guys so much for the huge amount of support that we've been getting. I know I've been saying this for like the past 5 or 6 episodes, but we just ticked over 1,000 listeners. We got our first piece of like fan email. What would you call it the other day?
Yeah, we've had several little pieces, but this one was really sweet, and it made me kind of feel like Michael Ellis for a second, where someone was like, "Thank you so much for doing what you're doing because you've helped my business so much." And anyways, yeah, that was really sweet. Sorry, go ahead.
It's okay. It was great. Keep them coming, please. Thank you guys so much for listening. Now, in this episode, we figured what better way to absolutely maximize our time with Mr. Michael Ellis than to dive into the art of teaching, because this is something that he's perfected over time. We were just talking and he said he's been doing content online now for something like 12, 13 years. And we want to dive into a little bit of his backstory, a little bit of what it is that makes a good teacher in dog training and everything in between. So before we dive into that, you can find us all on Instagram. You can find me at Untamed Dog Co. That's Untamed Dog Co, all one word. Brant's is all one word as well. It's Canis Behavior, Canis Behavior. Michael Ellis, you can find at Michael_Ellis_school, as well as at Leerburg. And also don't forget to check out his website, michaelellisschool.com. Over to you, Brent.
Yes, sir. All right, everybody. So for those of you guys who do not know who Michael Ellis is, Michael Ellis is probably one of the best educators of our generation, of our time in dog training, right? He has provided us with wonderful content through Leerburg and through his school for the last 12, 13 years. And I mean, we're just so grateful to have him on. And trying to kind of help give you a little bit of a prompt. The whole point of this podcast, in essence, is to provide value for up and coming dog trainers. And one of the big things that to me would really add value to people is understanding the journey. Right. Sometimes when we look at a professional like yourself and we see your content and your teaching ability, it's really hard for us to know that once upon a time, like, you weren't good at stuff. Right.
Sure.
and you know, there's a lot of, you know, especially speaking for my own generation, there's a lot of impatience. There's a lot of huge desire to want to get good really fast. There's a lot of passion that kind of sometimes go misdirected. And so, you know, we'd really like to dive into understanding a little bit more of your story, how you started, what your passions were, who your mentors were, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, because this is a journey. I've been doing this now for 12 years myself, Mariano almost 10 years now. And it is a journey. And you would have asked me when I was 18 years old, I wouldn't have told you like, yeah, I'm going to be a professional dog trainer. Yeah, no, I didn't think that. It was one of those things that you follow your passion, you follow your heart. As Tyler Muto said last week, he said, you know, dog training can be very mentally stimulating if you allow it to be. And I couldn't agree more. So anyways, let's go ahead and hand it over to you, Michael. Again, thank you so much for being on this podcast. Let's dive into the story that is Michael Ellis.
Sure. Thank you guys again for having me on. I really appreciate it. I think you hit on a couple of things that are really important, right? We live in a time where people are sort of enamored with instant gratification, right? You can get a lot of things fast. You can get information fast. You can get lots of things fast. But we all know that expertise there takes time, period. There's no shortcutting it. And we're in a good time in that you have access to lots of information that frequently took longer to acquire. Like, I came up through the dog training club system, I'll talk about in a second, through that club system. And so you had to physically go to fields and meet trainers to see what was going on. Now, there were no training schools in the same way that there are now. The internet was not active, so didn't exist. And so people weren't getting access to the same kind of information you can now. And so that is great. You can jumpstart certain things. You can get an education faster than you used to be able to, but you can't shortcut the hands-on experience. It just takes time. You got to do it. You got to be there. You got to see it. Somebody can tell you something, but regardless of, and that may make sense to you, but that doesn't mean you know it. You know it in your body and your heart. And like, like, I've seen this, I've done it, I've felt it. I know what it should feel like, all those kinds of things. So hopefully the passion that people have for training is what allows them to stay in long enough to get good at it, because there aren't going to be shortcuts there. There are shortcuts to information, but not shortcuts to true knowledge, the real kind of knowledge. And so I grew up in Southern California, grew up in San Diego.
Nice.
Yeah, bugged the parents relentlessly as a kid to get a dog, and they finally caved when I was about 13, and they let me get I wanted a Doberman. They said no Doberman, but they let me get a German Shepherd.
Oh, even better.
Everybody thought Dobermans were vicious, and I was enamored with them for all the wrong reasons, of course, as a kid, because I thought they were Republican, whatever. But I got a German Shepherd, and the parents demanded that I train it. If I was going to have the dog, I had to take care of it and train it. So I went to the local German Shepherd dog club and took an obedience class, and that got me connected with people in the club, and I started getting into junior handling, and I'd kennel sit for one of the older couples that ran a kennel, and I got into showing dogs all through into high school and through high school. And so it was a hobby. And in high school, I was 18 probably. I was at a dog show, and there was a police and Schutzhund demo at this dog show. And I saw that, and I'm like, okay, that's for me. That's totally, I got to do that. So I went home and immediately looked up what a local Schutzhund club. None of the dogs I had were even remotely suitable for that.
Yeah.
They weren't going to be doing it. So I started doing decoy work because I was young and able-bodied. So they're like, here, put the sleeve on, do this.
Right? Like work your way in, kid. Go ahead.
Work your way in. So I was involved in that. I got in that way, and I was involved in AKC obedience and dog shows and all that kind of thing. No intention of turning it into a career at all, right? And so it was a hobby. And as I went through college, still a hobby. And I taught like an obedience class for pet stores. I worked a little bit for a friend's kennel to make money on the side part-time while I was going to school and stuff like that. But I didn't envision this as a career, sort of like you had said. Right? No.
What did you envision as a career?
Actually, I was going to be a biologist. So my degree's in biogeography. So resource conservation, ranger, like environmental planning, that kind of stuff. So
yeah, that's a girl I dated. That's her major and still is. Yeah.
Maybe she'll become a world-class dog trainer.
Yeah. maybe who knows where life's going to take you? I can tell you, not where you think it's going to take you. That is sure. Yeah, I thought for sure I'd be like an environmentalist involved in that stuff. So, as I went into that, it just happened that while I was in school, one of the clubs that I'd worked with had some new members, and they asked if I would come and help show them the ropes a little bit. So I did some kind of little weekend clinic for a group of trainers at one of the Schutzhund clubs that I'd been going to, and it went reasonably well. And so another club nearby had asked about hosting a seminar type thing, and they said, well, he did a good job, you want to do it? And so I went and did another one, and it literally started like that. I was competing in dog sports and doing that stuff as my hobby, and I would do a seminar here and there, and over the course of several years it started to pick up steam. I didn't advertise, I didn't start a business. Clubs just started to ask me to do these things. And at a certain point, it started to really pick up. And so for 14 years, I guess it was, I traveled and gave seminars to dog training clubs and organizations. So police departments, military, various dog clubs, from agility clubs and competitive obedience clubs, and lots of bite sport clubs and that kind of thing. And at some point in there, I'm like, well, I guess this is my job, right? It got busy.
I'm still gonna save the animals.
Yeah, it got busy enough that I'm like, this is what I'm doing, I guess. And in that process, I realized very quickly in the early seminars that I was doing that you can know how to do something, but teaching other people to do it is a completely different skill set, right? And so my wife is actually has a teaching credential, and she gave me some strategies for teaching, and I started paying attention to that, to think about that. I realized one of the first seminars I did, I realized that people are going to ask you about everything you do, every little tiny thing. Like, how do you hold the tug exactly? Like, what are you standing on when you give it to the dog? How do you do this? And I'm like, hold on a sec, let me figure it out. It's like this. Right? As a dog trainer, if you're doing it for a long time in that sense, then there are things that you just figured out and you don't remember when you figured them out, and you're not, you just do it a certain way. And so I started to pay attention to all those things, and I started to break them down. I started to read about teaching strategies. I started to, when I got up in front of people and talked, I learned to pay attention to their facial expressions and whether they understood what I said or not. I spent time thinking about different ways of saying the same things. So I started teaching myself to be a teacher ultimately. Because I realized that's what the job was. Like, you got to know your subject as a teacher, but ultimately, can I get other people to understand this, and can I engage them in a way that makes sense to them? And so that was a perfect laboratory for that. While I was doing these seminars, I got to land myself in front of a new group of people every week. Every weekend I was in someplace different. New group of people, brand new group of dogs, and you had to go in there. You had to make sense to them. You got to watch them troubleshoot with their dogs and give them advice. And the education I gained doing that is immense. I don't know. It would take 5 lifetimes to get that information, to get that kind of education if I didn't have kind of dive into that.
Right.
And at the end of that period of time when I was doing seminars a lot, after this was 2009 is when I opened the school. So 2007 and 8, those last couple of years, I was doing about 40 to 45 seminars a year. So I was flying someplace different every weekend. So I'd fly out on a Wednesday or a Thursday, and I'd come home on a Monday, and I'd fly out again somewhere else. And at that period, I got to the point where I'm like, I can't travel anymore. I'm losing my mind. And so I had a choice at that point to open up a dog training business. I'm like, certainly. And I'd done that, like, while my wife was in grad school and we were in New York. I did seminars, but at that time I'd do, 1 a month kind of thing. And so I trained pet dogs on the side and all that kind of thing. So I figured I could start a training business. But I'd really spent the last decade getting good at teaching trainers to be better trainers. And so, well, let's open up a dog trainers school. And so I did that in 2009 and started in a warehouse in Fairfield, and it went well. And
you're doing okay.
You're doing all right.
Right just before I opened the school, I hooked up with Leerburg. So actually, Cindy Rhodes.
How did that happen? Tell us about that.
Yeah, so Cindy Rhodes, Ed's significant.
Because we used to think you were Leerburg,
right? That is a misconception. That's no doubt. No, Ed's been doing this a long time, and what we have on the internet now, Ed had VHS tapes, and when I came up in dog training, like, if you wanted to see what KNPV was about, or if you wanted to watch the Bundesliga or whatever,
he produced those.
You either went to Germany or Holland or whatever, or you bought a Leerburg VHS tape.
Yeah.
Nobody else was doing that. So I have boxes of old Leerburg VHS tapes somewhere in a storage, because I saw Belgian Ring that way. I saw KNPV that way. I saw the stuff through that, right? These European dog sports. And so he was hugely influential on me because that content just wasn't available. The internet didn't exist.
Yeah.
And so I was doing a seminar in Minnesota, and Cindy Rhodes, Ed's significant other, very good dog trainer, showed up at the seminar. We really clicked, and she went back and told Ed, and Ed came to the next seminar I did in that area, and he's like, "Hey, you want to do videos?" And I had said, "Yeah, I've been wanting to, but I don't have time. I can't stop what I'm doing now. I go somewhere every weekend and find the time to film and script them." And he's like, "Okay, well, we'll take care of it." So he actually, the initial videos he shot at seminars. So he'd come to a seminar and he'd videotape, and then he'd go back and cut it up. That's why some of them are so long, right? So some of them are unruly. We've gone back and redone a lot of them, but some of the originals were just basically cut together footage from seminars.
Right.
And then as we got further into that process, then I started scripting them ahead of time. I kind of said, okay, I'll organize an outline and we'll do all that kind of stuff ahead of time. But the original ones were just shot up at seminars. But it was huge because that got me out there in a way so that when the school opened, people were already starting to know who I was due to that kind of stuff as well. So it was hugely helpful in letting me get the school started and stopping traveling at that point in time.
Right. It's crazy. So it's like it's the internet really just. I think you were. I don't know if you were you the. Was there someone else who was Michael Ellis-ish, or were you the first one to just kind of
No,
take off on the internet?
on the, I don't know, because like I'm on the internet. I'm terrible about all of the stuff, so I use it like everybody else does. But
To order pizza.
yeah, right. And so there were many other trainers that were spreading good information ahead of that. So Ivan Balabanov and I came up around the same time. He is a genius dog trainer. He and I are friends and would train together at various times. He was making content and things very early on. He has books and videos, which he's extremely gifted. Before that, it was mostly done through seminars and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
There were many good trainers that would go to clubs, organizations, and that kind of stuff for educational experiences or conferences and that kind of stuff. But the actual kind of established trainers, it just happened that I'd been doing that for a long time when the internet really started to kick up in that sense. And so that kind of allowed me
where YouTube started taking off.
Yeah, so that allowed that sort of slide out. And to be honest, I still don't even remotely use it to the best of advantage. I'm terrible about it. If Leerburg weren't throwing out the stuff for me, then it would be bad.
Yeah. I get that. I totally get that. That's cool. So I like how you guys connected,
Yeah.
do you think Leerburg was a little bit of a launching pad because they kind of had some
there's no doubt. Yeah, there's no doubt. Like, so Ed he got on the internet very early. So he'll tell the story, but a friend of his from college was a professor in computer science or something at one of the universities, and very early in the commercial aspects of the internet.
Right.
You need to get in here. And so Ed had a website up selling dog stuff way early, one of the first commercial dog sites there. And so he was well established and had a mailing list and all that kind of stuff. So that when he started to get my content out there, and I'm positive there's no way the number of people would have seen me without Leerburg. And yeah, they for sure have been great. And I'm a terrible marketer. Like, I don't like it. Like, so I'm training trainers to be professional trainers, and they always ask me, like, so, what's your strategy for marketing? And I say, do good work, and people will notice you, and they'll tell other people. That's really it's
true. It's true.
Dude, that's not really helpful. Like, do you pick up Facebook ads or what?
Yeah. Nowadays, it's just have someone follow you with a camera and just do whatever you do.
Yeah.
And that's marketing.
Well, it's crazy how marketing has changed these days. I mean, some of the biggest channels on YouTube, for example, are just vlogs of people doing pretty much nothing, but they get like 15 million views per video. And it's just like, hey, I'm going to the store, I'm going to the park, and having nice shots and a bit of editing and some music and stuff, and people eat that right up. But it's such a weird thing where, like, my little sisters at my mom's house do this thing where they watch videos of little girls playing with dolls. They have toys of their own, but they watch these kids play with other toys, and I'm like, why is this so interesting?
Yeah, we should be concerned. We should be concerned about them.
Each his or her own, but no way, man.
So tell us about you, man. You have kids, you have a family. What's going on?
I have a wife of 30 years now, and
whoa, that's amazing.
We have no kids, lots of dogs and other critters. We live in Sebastopol, California, which is in western Sonoma County.
Okay.
About an hour north of San Francisco in wine country.
Very
quiet,
nice.
mellow place. Yep. That's it. My wife is an actress and theater director. She had an MFA from Columbia in acting, and when the school took off and started to get busy, I stole her from her actual career and made her administrator of the school. So she doesn't get to do nearly as much theater these days as she would like, because she's too busy helping
you out.
Yeah, it would not be happening without her by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah, having a good woman by your side, man, doing what you're doing. That's
everything.
That's everything. So let's dive into another little question about the past. Let's talk about, you know, like some people, they remember some of their like their favorite elementary school teachers.
Mhm.
They know them by name and they remember them and they remember the impact that they had on them. Let's talk about some of the people in your journey that have
Mhm.
really just impacted you, where you were like, I say this because this person taught it to me when I was blank, right?
Yeah.
Who are those impactful people?
So some of them are school teachers for sure that have nothing to do with dogs. So certainly Mrs. Ostermeyer, a junior high English teacher.
Nice.
There's some people that really helped me with my intellectual journey. And so as a teacher, they helped me kind of organize how I think and be comfortable in front of people. And they made me read a lot and made me curious about learning and a lot of that kind of stuff. So I had several teachers through that. When we start talking about dog people, I have tons of them because, again, I came up through a club system. So there are people, like many people I learned. So the people that got me into dogs originally, the people that I took the initial obedience class at the German Shepherd Dog Club, there were a couple there. Victor and Harriet Gega, who owned Von Victor Kennels in San Diego County forever, long since passed. But they kind of grabbed me and said, like, hey, look, there's this whole other world of dog stuff. And they would let me kennel sit for them when they went on vacation. And,
Cool.
and so there was all kinds of stuff that sort of hooked me into that world. I worked for a veterinarian while I was in high school, when I was going to dog shows, that was into showing dogs too in Pennsylvania. And that was very influential. But the dog people, when you train with a variety of people in clubs, you wind up meeting a lot of people. So there were a ton of trainers in the Southern California area when I was coming up that I spent time. So Al Banuelos was a well-known Schutzhund trainer at the time. I trained American Bulldogs and eventually had Malinois. I mentioned Ivan Balabanov was coming up at the same time, and his way of thinking was hugely influential. There's a woman, I wish I knew her name, when I had learned training initially, like everybody else at the time that I learned training, we learned straight up Keeler method pressure, right? So choke 6-foot leash and a choke chain. And there was a obedience club that shared one of the bite sport fields that we worked at. And there was an AKC obedience trainer there, and she had a border collie, and she was out doing obedience one day. And I wish I knew her name. I would love to call her and say thank you. But she, I'm like, her dog doesn't look like our dogs. Like, what?
That dog looks happy.
What is she doing? Right?
Yeah.
So I watched her train and talked to her a bit, and it sent me off on a different journey. Right. I had seminars that I went to, like a Karen Pryor seminar back in the day when she was just starting and talking about clicker training and all that kind of stuff. That was like changed the direction of my way of thinking about training and that kind of thing. Mitzi Robinson, now she was Walker then, was a woman that ran a Schutzhund club in Ramona, in northern San Diego County, when I grew up, and I started doing helper work there, and she showed me a lot, taught me a lot. And when you're in the club system, and I was young and unattached, so we drove everywhere. The people I trained with, Lisa Mays, who was my partner in breeding dogs for many years, we came into that bite sport world around the same time, 1989. I met her, and she had an incredible way of thinking about training, was highly influential on the way I thought about training as well.
What do you think the big takeaway was from that?
For her, she was probably the original balance trainer, in my opinion. Right? She was the queen of it. Like, so she was a very good pressure trainer, and she had learned pressure training like everybody else. And when she got attached to reward-based training, she did a very good job of blending it. And hers was really balanced, right? So these days, when people talk about balance training, a lot of people are using it as an excuse to use pressure, right? I did 2 days of food work, and then I put an e-collar on the dog. I'm a balance trainer, kind of thing. She really had a balance, and she also had an kind of out of the box way of thinking about things. So it wasn't specifically techniques. She just kind of read dogs well and thought about things differently.
There was an empathic side to her
than I do. Like, so I'm very analytical and very step by step. and she had a kind of feel. And so she would approach a problem, and sometimes she would say something to me in a way that I was like, well, that's not the way I would have thought about it. And it makes you come at a problem in a different way. Ivan Balabanov is also very much the same way. Like, he is a dog training savant. Like, he is a genius. And every once in a while he would say something or do something, where I would say, well, that shouldn't work. Why does it work? Kind of thing. And so it always made me pause and reevaluate things that I thought I knew, which is essential to you becoming a better trainer, right? You have to be able to say, like, we know things, but can you modify your knowledge, and can you change your thinking about certain things? And that gets hard. The better you get at it and the more success you have, the harder it is to sort of shake up the way you think about things a little bit.
Right.
Dr. Stuart Hilliard is a good friend of mine.
Yeah. Actually, who talked to us about Dr. Hilliard?
It must have been Tyler.
Must have been Tyler. Yeah. Oh yeah. Cause that was post. Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead. Yeah. He's dope.
For sure. Yeah. He's an amazing guy, brilliant, a very good dog trainer. He was creating content. So before, if you want to talk early content, that was him in the 80s. He was doing videos for Canine Training Systems, which was like Leerburg's competition, making dog training videos. They were a company in Colorado. And he did some videos on Schutzhund and helper work and stuff in the 80s. He was actually the person that hosted and brought French ring sport to the US.
Oh, wow.
The very first ring sport seminar in the US was after Stuart made a trip to Europe and came back and brought French trainers back and did a seminar at Colorado. I don't want to say in the mid 80s, 86, 87, something like that.
Wow.
He did a seminar here, and that kind of brought that to the US. But watching there's a tape on protection work that he did, and he was decoying, and he was showing foundation protection work. And as a decoy, and I don't want to go too far down this road because lots of people probably don't know what I'm talking about. But anyway, the person getting bit by a dog in protection work is the person training the dog. So you tend to, when people think of training their dog in protection, you're handling the dog. The person getting bit is the one that's teaching the dog, right?
Right.
The decoy, the helper, the agitator, whatever you want to call that person, their skills drive your success. If you're going to be successful, it's because they are doing their work right. And it's a kind of a reaction to the dog. You observe the dog, you read their body language, and when they do something, you need to react so that they think they're making an impact on you, right? And it's a huge thing. And he was super dramatic in his reactions in this video, right? His first video, very dramatic. But that's when it clicked for me. Like, nobody explains it. You watch people work the dogs, and it doesn't look like they're doing anything. You can't see from the outside, but his reactions were big reactions. And I remember clearly at the time, I'm like, oh my God, that's my job, to make the dog feel empowered by So, but his would be like, he'd stare at the dog, and the dog would bark, and then it was like a wave of water. He'd throw his arms back like he was getting hit by a wave of water. And but it made it obvious to somebody that was starting in that world of helper work.
To kind of add a little bit of theatrics to it, a little bit.
And you saw it clearly. You saw his reaction, as opposed to some little subtle reaction that I might make where the dog's biting me and I twitch my arm a little in the sleeve. You don't even see that from the outside. So I'm thinking, oh, and it was a game changer for me, like a game changer, right? And so I felt I felt like I knew him before I met him the first time, right? Just from watching him, and I won. Yeah, it was incredible. So he had a big impact on the way I think about training. And then there were just many trainers from Europe that came over and did seminars, other friends, people you meet along the way, that you get a good idea here, you get a good idea there. Like, watching good people train, you pick up epic amounts of it. Once you get your education to a certain point, and you know the core principles, going and watching good trainers do their thing, which I had the luxury, traveling around all the time, of watching just scads of incredible trainers do their work, and I pick up something here and something there.
Now, were you the type that learned the most from watching, or would you straight up go to the person after with a bunch of notes and be like, what about this? What about that? Explain that to me. Like, what was your process like?
Watching, definitely.
Like,
yeah.
And mimicking what you saw.
And seeing it, and kind of trying to figure out why what they were doing was working, why what somebody was doing wasn't working, and that kind of thing. And it was a process. I would collect that information and then deal with it that way. But mostly from just watching. I mean, you have conversations and ask people, what they think and what their process is and all that kind of thing a little bit. But most of it was just from being around and watching them work. Right.
That's always a big aspect of watching you work and watching your videos that has fascinated me is how do you know exactly what pieces of information, or I guess over time you've just kind of boiled it down to a science, the tiny pieces of information that people need to know. And an example was, I was watching a video of you doing food work with I think it was Rush, and you were using food in your hand and you were explaining in great detail the importance of vertically speaking, staying the same height off of the ground with your hand. And so you use that step in order to, keep your body low to the ground. Because of course, if you stand still, your arm only goes so far before it ends up coming up.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's all stuff that I got to once I started having to teach it.
Okay.
I figured out over, and again, I got to practice that a lot. So when I would go out, you realize people would ask you things, and then I'd step away from that and I'd analyze, and I started to think about, okay, why does this work? How come that dog keeps hooking at the end, or how come that dog keeps biting my hand here? What's going down, right? And so I started to break things down, and then I started to think about it the way you would if you were going to teach somebody a sport, like isolating pieces instead of, like, there's a lot of variables. You put somebody out there with a dog, they have to focus on the dog and how they're moving, and there's too many variables at once when you're beginning. And so if you focus on one thing, you lose something else. If you focus on that thing, you can't hold them all in your head yet. And so the idea of breaking things up into smaller pieces, sort of like what we do for dogs, right? And if you're doing good training, you break it down into little digestible pieces. And I sort of started to do the same thing a little bit for training. And like watching people to see if they were processing the information, if I was giving them too much. That one of the hardest things when you're beginning to teach training is what details to give somebody at what point in their development. And so if I take a total beginner, I can't hit them with everything. Right. So which ones are the most important? Right. And how fast can I give them the next pieces? And it's going to be different with different people. So if you teach enough and you pay attention to people's reactions and you watch them, you're like, this person needs to stay here a little longer.
Right.
If I give them the next piece, they're not going to process it. Even they understand it, but they won't process it.
And that particular piece of information is something that's always fascinated me. And I like that you liken it to sports, because it does kind of make sense from a sport point of view. And one thing that we talked about with Tyler, and Brent and I have talked about this before, is a sport that I like is jiu-jitsu. I practice it a lot. Boxing I've been doing for a long time, and it is funny. And I also kind of wanted to tie this into the balance training aspect of things, because I do notice you're absolutely right. When someone's very new at something, they have to meticulously focus on the process to get something done. But in the big picture, it's not very much of anything. An example being, if I'm learning how to do a triangle choke, it's hard to do in and of itself as it is. So I'm putting hand here, putting leg there. But like in the grand scheme, while you're sitting there slowly figuring things out, you could lose the round one of a million other ways. And I noticed that younger trainers do have that sort of thing to them, to where if they focus on one thing, obviously they should and learn it well, but they can't lose sight of the big picture. And to bring it back to balanced training, Tyler had a really interesting perspective, which we kind of figured out before we even spoke to him. But when we had a chance to finally hear his own words, it was, yes, I mean, if you're going to work a dog, you have to make sure that they're doing things right. And, but also the overall momentum of the lesson itself matters more than a little hiccup here and there. And you don't want to shoot yourself in the foot in order to make some point that otherwise would be.
Well,
one mistake I made. So sorry. But one mistake, just my personal growth, was being too meticulous with the person and making them feel that they can't do it. And I remember that was something that when I was a young teacher, it was just, I would be like, nope, foot's wrong, do it again. Nope, hand's wrong, do it again. And I would just break their confidence.
That absolutely can happen. And then beyond that too, you can get to a spot where they're so afraid to make a mistake that they're not willing to experiment and push, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Like, you can get very good instruction, but the interaction each time is a little bit different with a dog,
Mm-hmm.
a living creature, right? And so it's slightly different, and the larger principles apply, but the feel for when to push or when to try something new, like when you're up against something, and if you make people, if you're too structured a little bit too soon, people are afraid to make a mistake.
To fuck
And,
up, yeah.
yeah, and so there are mistakes that you have to make to get better, and
Mm-hmm.
you have to try some stuff. Like, okay, now you're stuck there.
You know
Innovate.
what?
Yeah.
Try something.
You know what's funny is a tiny bit of our back history is Brent and I have been working together for a long time. You know, I'm in Arizona, but once upon a time I lived in LA, and he and I worked at the same kennel, and he was like the head training manager, and I was learning how to be a dog trainer, and they had an official like internship program, and I was never actually an intern. I would just stay after my shift
I
and
love this story.
and just learn how to train dogs. So I'd be there from opening to closing, and then after that, and he and I would go to the bar after a long day's training session and talk about things. And one thing that I noticed about what I think just made us such good friends is Brent pushes a lot, but I just don't take it personal. I understand he's trying to make you better, and you know, something that I really found interesting was,
well, you were like my Malinois. Like I could put pressure on you, and you'd come back and be like, "Do it again, I'll do better next time." Right?
But it was a matter of perspective, though. It's like I understand. So it's like, okay, a couple things that are clear. You're smart. You're tough. You're like strict, but also that you care, and so on and so on. So the reason why I bring this up is to So the reason why I bring this up is to say that when we had our other assistants, so now we're talking years down the line, Brett and I are training, and we had our training assistants. They would learn their particular phase of training, whatever that was at the moment. We've got a dog that's 2 days in, 3 days in, and they know how to do food work, sits downs, and whatever else. And they know how to do the stuff that comes after, but they would be a little reluctant to move from here to there. And so we had to give them confidence sometime and coach them through, like, look, I know you know how to do this, and I know you know how to do that. Work from here to there and show me how you do, and kind of taking those training wheels off a little bit.
Yeah, no, it's essential part of it. And there's developmental spots where people are ready to receive things. That's the hardest thing. And I still, as a teacher, it's hard because people are different, like the dogs are different too. And so I know for sure I was given information at various points in my development that I wasn't ready to receive.
Yeah.
Somebody would say to you and you'd nod like, yeah. That sounds logical, but I have no place in my worldview to put that. Right.
Right.
And then 3 years later or 5 years later, you're like, oh, yeah, that was really good advice. I just don't have any place to put it yet. Right.
Yeah.
And that's a microcosm of that same kind of thing. And that's going to happen for the rest of your training life. Right. You may have been exposed to an idea that didn't fit your whole methodology or worldview yet, but there may be a place where it does.
Right.
And what do you give to people at various times? And you want to
right.
Yeah.
Fundamentals down first. And so that's one of the things that's really challenging. And of course, excited dog trainers want to get to there.
Right.
And so that's
One other thing we talked about, Tyler. So to Tyler about, and I mean, sorry, we're not comparing you guys. You guys are two excellent speakers.
We're friends.
Teachers.
I really like Tyler.
You're like, Tyler sucks. No, Tyler's the man. Love Tyler. He's been so helpful. He's been so helpful. So one thing we talked to Tyler about is we were actually discussing, I asked him, I said, okay, dog training is an art form. And if dog training is an art form and we're all to be artists, what is our color palette? Right? What is the color palette? As an artist, you need to know how to use your colors, but then there's other variables as well. There's dimension. There is, other things like contrast. There's all these different things, right? There's all these variables. And so I asked him, I said, if you were to paint me a picture of like a young and up and coming dog trainer, what's his color palette that you need to start understanding right off the bat? Right? Are they methods? Are they techniques? And he responded, he goes, principles. It's all the principles. And he goes, understand your operant conditioning, understand your classical conditioning, understand your reinforcement schedules, understand, all of these different things. He goes, if you study those principles, you at least now have the color palette understood, right? If we were going to elaborate on this, what else would you add to, like, okay, so that's kind of like our foundational stuff. Like
Right.
that's our theoretical. It sits right in our mind.
Yeah.
What else would you elaborate? Like,
So I'd add the mechanical stuff. So I think there's two worlds, and they're not always connected for people, right?
Mhm.
And so that's the how dogs learn portion.
Mhm.
You have to understand what makes them tick, how they work, how we're going to communicate with them, kind of the science behind it. That understanding those principles are key, right?
Mhm.
Then there's the mechanical part. The
Mhm.
mechanical part is totally separate. You can understand perfectly how operant conditioning works, but you can't hold a leash.
You can't execute. Yeah.
You don't have timing. You don't know how to move your body. There's a
Mhm.
lag between seeing and communicating.
Mhm.
That's learned, that's practiced, like anything else. And so all those things, so the things that we break down the mechanical ways. So obviously this can be a very big topic, but there are some basic ways in which we typically create behavior physically, right?
Mhm.
So we use conditioned reinforcers, markers, clickers, whatever kind of thing. But the physical ways in which we manipulate dogs, luring, kind of
Spatial pressure.
facial pressure, using the leash, shaping stuff. And so the mechanics of that stuff
Yes.
also needs to be broken down for people.
Yes. Yes.
If their mechanics are bad, they can understand it and they get really frustrated. So some
Yes.
of the students that have the biggest problems when they come to the school are very smart people that really understand the intellectual part of it. They get it.
Right.
Like, they've read it all. They've watched the videos. It all makes perfect sense in their head, but their body's not cooperating in the beginning.
Yes.
So both of those. And then the other side, you have people that naturally are very good, talented physically. They move well. They've got good timing. That just feels easier to them, but they don't know the why or the how. And so they make mistakes because they don't understand the other part of it. So
that's huge.
Mechanics is the big deal too.
Right. And that's huge because I feel, so I've trained many trainers over the last 8 years. And, you get someone who comes from a different, like a pure positive background who now is ready for something new. Right. And as soon as you start introducing pressure, there's always kind of this aversion to pressure in general, even if it's something as light as leash pressure, like a front to heel or, something like that. And there's this visceral response based on how much what they think and what they feel they understand, that they don't even want to execute the physicality of it. But once they get over that hump, they go, oh, super easy. And that in and of itself is a struggle. That's great. The technical skill. Okay.
I'm glad that you brought that up because, sorry, really quick, I spoke to recently. It's super hot out here, by the way. This is good old Phoenix, Arizona. So it's like,
sorry.
So, but so I take my dogs out, my board and trained dogs, when they're good enough. My way of socializing and getting them outside is I take them places where they can be inside. And one of the places I take them, of course, is like Petco, just because they're super dog friendly. And I ran into a couple trips ago, but also today, I was there a little while ago. They're one of their trainers, and he's a really nice guy. I mean, obviously he's pure positive because I know Petco only does like all positive training. And I spoke to him a little, and he's very nice, very like personable. And I invited him on, so I figure we'll have him on at some point. But I definitely think that it's important to talk to people from the different training ideologies and kind of get their perspective on things.
Absolutely. 100%. And it's weird to watch the evolution, right? So there are things that I learned when I was naive and young that if somebody asked me to learn to do that now, would I be able to? Right. So there's a point, I'm 16, and somebody says, here's how you yank on a leash, right?
Yeah.
Right?
And you're like, I could do that. Boom. And then
and you're like, really? I'm supposed to yank on the dog? They're like, absolutely, that's what you do. You got to commit to it. It has to be this way. And not knowing anything else, right? You commit. And you learn a skill. Then as your journey progresses, I learn better ways of doing that. And I learned that maybe I was unfair at various times and a whole bunch of other stuff. But by that time, that skill was in my toolbox. So although I don't use it as often as I used to by any stretch, it's there. And so now we have a whole generation of reward-based trainers who are very good at certain aspects of training, like much better than I was early in my journey on reward-based training when I was discovering how to do that, right? And so they're exceptionally good at this, but they can't handle a leash. And they know enough that they're in their own way to learning it, because in order to learn it, you have to commit to right.
Yes.
And you're going to make some mistakes, like you're along the way. I say it all the time, but like I would love to resurrect certain dogs and apologize to them, right? I learned to do things on you, and you're the one that suffered for my lack of skill and mechanics and my lack of understanding at that point in time, right? But if I hadn't gone through that, would I be able to do that now if that wasn't a journey? It's challenging when you're trying to educate dog trainers. Yeah. Which piece do I give them when, right? And so that they don't get so in their head that they can't commit to learning the new skill because it feels uncomfortable or it doesn't feel right.
Well, one thing I've seen is also, like, I remember when I came up, I had a community of dogs. I worked at a kennel, and then eventually I went from, assistant trainer all the way to training manager. And so I had trainers around me, and I had mentors around me, and I had people I could ask or see. And, shout out to Edward Valle, one of my homies who is in Texas now, and he doesn't even know I have a podcast, but that guy taught me technique, like such clean technique. And I remember being like, I want to do it like that, where everyone else was cranking and yanking and doing all this other stuff that, but yeah, sometimes the support of the community that's around you, the dog training community, it's easier to fall into those good and bad patterns, right? Yep. So you could have a community of, pure positive or very heavy-handed Keeler method trainers. And because that's the community, it's like it's easier for you to commit into that. Yep. Right. And so, like, one cool thing that, you look at like the whole Leerburg crew, or you look at like what Tyler's doing with Consider the Dog, and we're creating communities of dog trainers of different platforms, and how can we learn from each other? And ultimately, this whole, again, I kind of agree with Tyler, the term balanced dog trainer, but the concept of balanced dog training, we need to create more of that, right? It's too polarized, and we just need to kind of create more communities for people to feel safe to explore these ideas and theories and get coached, not judged.
Yeah. And I think, honestly, the hardest part about the balanced training is that it looks so different from dog to dog. If you're really doing it, if you really are embracing that ideal, then it's the dog that's in front of you. And one dog is going to be 90% reward based. Like, it's going to be 90% reward. Another dog, it's going to be 90% the other way, unfortunately, right? Just because of their temperament and their situation and where you are in their development. And those adjustments are hard for people, right? And he wants kind of a formula for it. Like, I'm going to come in and I'm going to do a week of this, and then I'm going to do a week of that. I think, unfortunately, you got like pet dog trainers have it harder, because a lot of, in a sense, what they're asking dogs to do is typically easier than a working dog trainer would be. Like, but what they have is they have arbitrary timelines put on them by economics. Yeah. Right? Yep. So they're constrained by the marketplace. And so that what winds up happening is, until we sort of pull the general public along and get them to start understanding better dog training, the fact that it's a process, it takes time. Like,
what you should start when he's small, not when
he's with a dog in a 2-week inboard, right?
Yeah.
If you're training well, how much are you going to accomplish, right?
Yeah,
you're going to put way too much pressure on that dog to make sure it looks like you accomplished something. Or the dog's going to look like, hey, it looks at you, it seems happy to be around you, and it sits, but like you're barely scratching the surface. And so, unfortunately, some of the timelines and some of the formulas that trainers are asking for, and like, how long should I do this before I do this, and how long should I do this before I do this, are thrust on them by the economics of what market bears. That guy says he'll do it in 4 weeks, so now I have to offer that, otherwise I don't get clients.
What's funny is with this kind of latest push, it seems, at least to me, of like advertising based dog training, I see a lot of that, like that 2-week off leash trained, any dog, any age, any stuff like that. And I've actually been pushing the other way and having a pretty good amount of success. So instead of trying to like race these people to the finish, I'll get a lot of phone calls that are like, hey, well, I spoke to so-and-so, and they were saying, for this price in 2 weeks, X, right? For my like 4-month-old Dobie puppy. And I'm like, the reason why I take longer is because you just, number one, I mean, could you theoretically teach the dog these things in that short amount of time? Possibly, but at what cost? I want the dog to not only learn their commands, but I want them to learn to just enjoy training, learn to enjoy working and paying attention and being with you. But also, the extra amount of time, I mean, sometimes there's just, or really all the time, there's just no substitute for good old just drills, and just get it ingrained into your brain, and really give the dog time in order to, like you talked about, even in a dog's training program. I notice this especially when we talk about socializing, or when we do balanced training with the dog, where at some point or another you do have to put pressure on the dog. I notice that every dog's trajectory, they're capable of more pressure the further they are in the program.
Oh,
Because
absolutely.
and I wanted to say that to kind of speak to your point about, just like a human student, dogs, you can try to teach them the lesson early if you'd like, but they're not really going to grasp the value of it until they're ready for it.
Until their fundamentals are down.
Exactly.
Yeah, just like humans. You know, I always look at why I sucked at soccer. I played soccer for many years. It's because, but intermittently as a kid, 5 years old, 7 years old, 9 years old. And I didn't pick up that sport that well because I was too busy figuring out how to dribble the damn ball.
I was dope at soccer.
Well, whatever, dude. All right. Well, where were we? Sorry, I got off topic.
Like I talk to students about this all the time, and talk to trainers about this all the time. There's this idea that if you're a better trainer, you can do things faster.
Right, right.
What do the best trainers do with their own dogs? They're not.
They take sweet ass time. They take sweet ass time. Yeah.
They take their time. They make sure all the fundamentals are beautiful before they worry about layering that on. Like,
True.
they're like, do I have an e-collar on my 6-month-old? No.
No. Yeah.
No, I have plenty of other stuff to do. I have lots of groundwork to lay. We have to get there, right? And so, to Mariano's point, that's it, right? So that's the deal. The more you have in there, then when you hit the pressure point, the dogs are like, oh yeah, I got this. I'm ready to absorb this. I have a place to put this information, right? And that kind of thing.
Well, you know what's funny?
Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. So the way that I've always thought about it with the dogs is the way that we were talking about our assistants, and they know what to do. It's just shifting from gear to gear is something that, even if they know what those gears are, they're reluctant to take that step. Dogs, as they get better, the reason why I think they're more capable of handling larger amounts of pressure, which is exactly why you up everything, right? Distance, duration, distraction later on in the program. That's why I don't take dogs out to Petco until they're like far enough along that I know that they can handle it. But I think the reason that is because they already have these kind of preset pathways that they can take. Oh, if I'm distracted, I do this. If they tell me do this, even if there's, so there's all these different routes that they can take. They have all these different tools under their belt already so that they can access them more readily. And then me as a trainer, knowing that they know these things, pressure is less of an immediate option, because I know that I can choose this tool, as opposed to being kind of like a one-trick pony. Because earlier on in my training career, I was definitely heavy with pressure, really needed to develop my food work. And when I did that, I've noticed, I mean, not only fundamentally speaking, do the dogs look quicker and happier and everything like that, but they just enjoy the process more. And so they're more consistent more of the time. And it's amazing to see that.
And they're more resilient to bad experience, all the rest of that kind of stuff, right?
Right.
You have more in the bank to bounce back from stuff and to handle things. You have coping mechanisms, the whole 9 yards, for sure.
That's awesome. What's the solution? So as pet dog trainers, because that's the majority. Would you say that there's more pet dog trainers than there are competitive?
Oh, by
dog trainers?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
It's the bread and butter of the dog industry for sure.
It is. What do you think? I know I don't want to dive into like the polarities of methods and all that stuff anymore, because I think we talk about it too much in all the other episodes. But what could we? How could we solve that problem? How could we solve that economical problem? Is it creating clubs where there's smaller memberships? Is it creating more content? Like, what is
education? It's education. So this is my mission in life, right? So since I get to access the trainers that are going to go out and access the general public who aren't trainers, right? Then we have a huge opportunity to influence what people think about dog training. And the average person that comes to a dog trainer doesn't understand dog training at all. They don't know what it is. They have all kinds of misconceptions of what's possible, what dogs are, what good training is, what it should look like. TV doesn't help, right? All that kind of stuff. And so people have these misconceptions. So our job as trainers, the trainers that would contact the general public, is to educate them in a broader sense about what dog training is. And we got to pull them this way. It's a process. You have to
Mm-hmm.
you have to be involved. I can't train your dog and hand it back to you and then we're done. They're not.
Yeah.
You're gonna
Yeah.
have
It's
to
not.
maintain it. You're gonna have to, and you should like it. We're cheerleaders for getting them excited, like about what
Yes.
dog training is. This is fun.
Yeah.
It's super cool. You can have a relationship with a dog that we can't have with any other species. It's ridiculous.
True.
They're amazing. And if you dive in, you will be richly rewarded. And so our job is to get them to take their time and participate in the process. So
Right.
little bits, we all pull it. And if people initially may go, oh, that guy, he couldn't help me. He wanted me to take 6 months to do this.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
other
Yeah.
trainer said that. But if more and more trainers start giving them the same information, and
Yeah. It starts becoming the norm.
it becomes the norm, it pulls the whole culture that way. And better dog training will be
Right.
available to everyone, and people will really understand what dog training is.
Yeah.
Ultimately, right? How long do we all go to school to get even fairly competent at things, right?
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
It's true.
Right.
And in a strange way, I kind of just get getting to know a little bit more, like your background of animal conservation and all that stuff. It's like that. Would you say this mission in dog training kind of comes back to that intrinsic goal that you had initially that made you want to go back into conserving animals?
Yeah, I
and
think
biology?
for sure. There's no doubt. Like my interest in critters in general, like has been there
Mhm.
since a little kid. Like I love that, and I hate what we're doing to the natural world, and certainly dogs are part of that. But
Yeah.
I think more, it's like anytime you get really into something, right? So anything
Right.
you're really super passionate about, it's very hard to interact with people who don't care about it, right?
Mm.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's what it is. Like you have somebody here, something that you really think is amazing, something that you really care about. And now you have this person that's like, I don't want to know about any of that. No, I don't want to put that much work into it. Just make my dog stop pulling on a leash. Make him
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
kind of
Well,
thing.
it's kind of like I don't know if you remember. Well, of course you remember. Of course you remember. You were there. But there was a time in dog training in my career, at least, where I'd ask people, "What kind of dog do you have?" And they'd answer with, "It's a rescue." And they'd say the word rescue as if it was a breed,
Yeah.
right? And so there kind of became this vibe socially where it was like, if you weren't rescuing, if you were buying puppies, you're a messed up person, right? Yeah. And so that came through, a lot of media and a lot of social media stuff, and just like the vibe was just created. Rescues are the way to go. If you're not rescuing, you're a jerk, right? You're a jerk. And always what my goal was try to figure out how can we make I don't necessarily want to create that type of propaganda for dog training, but to create a societal feeling of like, you're not training your dog. Come on, go train your fucking dog. Like where you get judged for not training your dog.
Right.
But it seems like it's so normal to not train your dog until they're destroying something, being annoying or being aggressive. Right. And I always tell people, is that the difference between a good dog and a trained dog? A good dog is just a dog who's not being annoying, aggressive, or destroying anything. Right. He can do anything else in the world, and he's a good dog, right? Yeah. So I think it's all moving in this direction. That we're trying to change the societal thoughts of like, you should train your dog, just like you should send your kid to school. You should, I don't know what's normal for kids. I don't know.
Yeah.
But
and it's getting better. You're right. Like it is getting better. More trainers are thinking like this. They're going out to clients. They're not trying to design their programs strictly to compete with the other guy.
Right.
The say, oh, this guy says he's got a off leash 3-week inboard, right? And dog fully off leash trained in 3 weeks. And people have stopped saying like, I'm not going to compete with that. Like I'm going to create a program that's right and finds balance and helps people successfully long term, because those people they're going to rely on an endless supply of new clients, because that client's not going to be happy down the road. Right. They send the dog, you do that, the dog goes back, they didn't participate in the process at all. It's going to gradually erode, and then 2 years later they're going to say, oh yeah, I paid this guy all this money and look at this dog, right? So unless you get them connected, and people are realizing that, trainers that are out there are realizing that, and they're extending their programs, they're doing good work, they're coming up with hybrid inboard and
private lesson,
including the people in the inboard training, like all that. It's getting better for sure.
Yeah,
and that's our continued mission.
And it's all in efforts to get the involvement of the owner, right?
Yeah,
I think if we can make that that more of that responsibility fall on the owner, then
yes,
then we will be more successful as dog.
100%. And they'll be happy too. Like when they come into a problem, they'll go, "Oh, okay, I think I know what to do here," because they were a participant in the process the whole way along. Right?
You know, it's funny because I've been working on this very recently. I think, you know, you guys talked in the beginning a little bit about COVID has really helped restructure programs that in a lot of ways from an intellectual standpoint, it's been pretty good. You know, it makes you think and it makes you get creative. And for me, it really helped because I started my online programs. And so I wrote up my homework and a little PowerPoint, and it does sharpen you a little bit. But there was a dog that I've been talking about for a while now, Milo, the little dog that's so fearful. He barks at airplanes in the sky. You know, I swear he's actually afraid of his own shadow. And that wasn't an exaggeration. And so he's been working with me. I'm going to have him for a total of 4 weeks. And he's now 3 weeks in. And what I've started doing with people is if the dog's doing, you know, 3 week, 4 week, whatever the case, at about the 2 week mark, I'll bring them in to visit the dog, but we do a lesson. The dog stays with me, but we'll go somewhere, do a little lesson. I'll explain to them some stuff of what the dog's been doing and why and what they're going to be doing. Then for the next lesson, when the dog actually goes home, we dive into the normal fundamentals of, okay, so he's home now, keep your routine in check, make sure that all these things are in order, and then we'll get fancy as we go. And I found that there is actually a lot of value to that. The people feel a little more
the process.
Right, because they go home and really have a week to chew on the information that you gave them. And the dog, it's been very valuable for me, depending on the dog, because of course, there are certain behaviors that a dog gives owners that they don't give the trainer. And 2 weeks into the program, we talk about the dog being able to handle certain pressures. Owner comes in and the dog goes, "Oh, you're right, I am protective." You know, so then owner goes home and I'm left with a dog that still is now showing me a little more of these things so that I can address them more directly now that we've got our foundations in place. And it allows my momentum to stay peaked for the rest of the program. Then the dog goes home looking as solid as possible.
Absolutely. You know, I think that kind of thing is essential. The last inboards that I did before, I obviously don't do them anymore. At the time, I had factored in client involvement the whole way. So I would take the dog for a week, and then they would come in at the end of the week and I would show them everything I did during that week. I would literally walk them through. This is how I started this. This is why I'm doing it. Now you try what I'm doing. And then I said, cool, I'll see you next week. I take the dog, I do the testing. You come in a week later. Here you go. Right.
Very nice.
And then I wouldn't have inboards shorter than 6 weeks.
That's like, yeah. I'm at a month right now, but I do 6 weeks for really intense cases.
And so even if they didn't do it themselves, they knew what the dog looked like at all those steps. They had participated some, and they had at least an idea of what the process would be like, right?
Well, you know what? And that really shows to the mastery of your skills, because there are so many dog trainers who want to keep it all a secret, or maybe they're ashamed of what they're doing and they don't want to put that in the forefront, you know? So like that's a skill I had to learn teaching a lot of workshops and group classes, was like, I need to make sure that my skills are refined. So I don't feel uncomfortable doing them in public.
Isn't that the weirdest thing, that people have that urge to keep things a secret like that?
Yeah. Like I never understood it. There are lots of people that do, and there are people that think, you know, that they're super gifted, they have something special and they want to maximize what they can get out of it. There aren't any secrets. We're all playing with the same principles rearranged.
Yeah, right.
There's no new dog training. It's not new.
And a rising tide lifts all boats, right?
Right.
All that stuff's out there. Somebody else is going to innovate off it. You're going to get the feedback from that. Somebody else is going to innovate that, and we all get better as a result of that.
So can I ask you a question then, with exactly that saying, right? A rising tide lifts all boats. I know that it's tough for younger trainers out there who may be listening, and us too, even. It's tough to find the time to record your sessions and to make content, but is it not absolutely essential these days, not only to help get information out there, but also I noticed that nothing sharpens you. I learned this little trick in boxing. Nothing sharpens you like watching yourself back and you're like, oh my God, I made that mistake.
Huge. That's one of the biggest benefits of the online classes that I've done for the students. So I have some where they have to shoot video homework every week, like some live now interactive, but they would get things and they'd have to shoot their video homework. And so what they got at the end of 16 weeks of that kind of thing, or whatever it was going to be, it was their habit to film every time they practiced. So
love that.
Off their phone up every time they went out to practice. And once that you learn so much watching yourself back. Right after a training session, turn around and watch yourself back. You can go like, oh, yeah, there, I didn't even realize I did that, and I didn't. And so if you can make it a part of your habit, it's a great thing to do.
Yeah, and I've noticed too, when it's you, when you're watching yourself, as opposed to all the other, I mean, because there's you online, there's Tyler, there's amazing trainers online, but when it's you in particular, making your own mistakes or whatever the case, you have that. Is it first person or third person, where you know the thoughts that are going through your head? Like, it is interesting. I'll watch myself with the same dog today versus yesterday versus the day before, and I noticeably am weaker at something, and I'm like, oh yeah, that was the day that I stayed up till like 2, huh? And so you have insights that you're like, man, it's crazy how much of your active time with hands-on with the dogs revolves around everything else being in sync, and that's, I think, crazy insightful information for younger trainers to keep in mind. Record yourself, watch it back; it will change you for the better.
And keep a training journal too. Like, so.
Oh,
like,
really?
Yeah, absolutely. We make all of our long-term students keep training journals. And so you sit down, and at the start of training a dog, you write down everything you hope to do with this dog. Like, aspirational. Like, if everything lands well, this dog is going to be a pet dog. He's going to hang out in my house. He's going to sleep in my bed. We're going to go hiking. I'm going to take up search and rescue and agility or whatever the hell.
I love that.
I'm going to do that.
Put it down, and then make a list of all the behaviors that your dog would have to know and the skills they'd have to have in order to do all those things, right?
So now you're reverse engineering the goal.
So you have a template here of, if I'm going to get here, what would my dog have to know? So you can focus your direction in your training session. So when you go in, you say like, okay, wow, I haven't started this skill. I should start this skill, or whatever that's going to be.
Yep.
And then keep track of everything you do with the dog, like how much exercise, how much you fed it, how long your training sessions were exactly, like how much the dog played with the other dogs that day, and your plan for a training session when you go into it, and then what you actually did. Plans are good as long as you're willing to abandon them when they need abandoning.
True.
And then what you did, and then your impressions afterwards. And if you videotape it too, then that helps you with your impressions of, oh, my dog seemed a little flat today. Well, this, we took the 10-mile jog this morning, so I probably shouldn't do that before I train on training day, or whatever you're going to be, right?
Right.
And patterns that you won't hold in your head otherwise. You'll look back and you'll notice the things like you said. Oop, that was the night I was up too late. That's the night I kept my dog up too late, and he's not right. Whatever that is, and you'll start to recognize those things, and it's helpful. Like, there's no way you're holding that all in your head all the time, and especially if you have multiple dogs. So a trainer that's got multiple dogs in for training, like, you got to shift gears every time, and that helps you sort of reset where you are with that dog all the time.
Thank you for listening to the Dog Trainers Podcast, a podcast created by dog trainers for dog trainers, or anyone who's ever fallen in love with man's best friend. Join us again next week for part 2 of The Art of Teaching with Michael Ellis.